Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. The Long View is a proud member of the Dice Tower Network. Go and check out all that the Dice Tower has to offer. They have a huge database of reviews and commentary. Their site is fully searchable and indexed, so you can go in and type in a person's name. You can go in and type in the name of a game. Anything that has anything to do with either of those two things will instantly pop. You'll see reviews of games, you'll see video links, you'll see all kinds of stuff. You'll see contributions made by a particular individual. It's all fully searchable and indexed, and it's a fantastic resource for board gamers. That's thedicetower.com. The Long View is also proudly sponsored by GameSurplus.com. Go and check out all that Game Surplus has to offer. They have a huge selection of games, they have unparalleled customer service, super fast shipping, and the ability to track down anything that you might be looking for. If you send Velma an email over there at games@gamesurplus.com, let her know what you're looking for, and she'll track it down for you just as quickly as you can. So go check out why gamesurplus.com is my choice whenever I buy board games online. And if you do go, please be sure to tell them the Long View sent you. I also, of course, want to send a shout out to my local game store, the Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Go and check out all that they have to offer. They are a growing resource for people here in the Northeast PA region and northern New Jersey. They are convenient, located right off of Interstate 80 in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, right on Main Street. They have a huge collection of board games, card games, collectible card games, lots of open space, a friendly staff. Go and check out why the Gamer's Edge is a fantastic place for gamers here in our neck of the woods. My name is Jeff Gamble. I'm the host of The Long View, and today I am very pleased to be joined all the way from Dayton, Ohio by Jimmy Okalika, who is going to be talking with me tonight about the fantastic and intriguing title 18OE. So, Jimmy, thanks a lot for agreeing to be on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Good to be here.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. This is quite a big game, very difficult, for me to even thinking about doing a review on my own. And so I was really pleased when, you responded that you'd be willing to talk about this game because I've dipped my toes in the 18XX waters, as some might say, but I don't have an enormous amount of experience with them. And I know, from following you on BGG and other kind of writings that you've done, I know that you are. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that really caught my attention was I actually read your written review of 18OE on Board Game Geek, and I thought, wow, this is Jimmy. I know this guy. It's kind of like, hey, I know that guy. And I thought, hey, this would be great because you have kind of a wealth of experience that I don't have. So I was really pleased that you were willing to do the show. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, my pleasure. I love 18OE. I've been playing it since it was in a playtest. I had the chance to play test some of the short scenarios with Mark Frazier and the designer Ed Sinclair, and yeah, I've been loving it ever since.
Yeah, it's a game that really just is difficult to describe in some ways because of the sheer scope of it. But it's also difficult to describe because of all of the kind of flexibility that the game offers. And I think we'll touch on that a little bit later. For those out there listening, I want to say right off the bat that, this is a game about, the 18XX kind of series of games. These are train games, transportation games. Sometimes they're themed even in outer space. Most of them, however, I'm thinking of like 2038, I think that's themed out in space. It's like asteroid mining or something of that nature, right?
Yep.
Exactly. And there's others, most of them, however, are kind of all about the sort of golden age of rail. If you're unfamiliar with the 18XX kind of system, what I would really encourage you to do is just pause right here, leave Jimmy and I behind for a bit, and go back to thelongviewpodcast.com and look in the archives there and listen to the 18XX episode. This is an episode that I recorded with Eric Brocious and Joe Huber, and I think I'm very proud of that. not really because of what I did, but because I was able to offer that to people, because Joe and Eric are just fantastic ambassadors for 18xx, and they did such a wonderful job of explaining the genre as a whole, and then giving some specifics about the different types of games, and briefly touching on many of them, that if you're kind of unfamiliar with 18xx, go listen to that first, and then come back here, and Jimmy and I will be waiting for you. So, Jimmy, I understand that you had the chance to kind of play test this game and work with it even before it was published. For me, my experience with the game was it really started at the WBC last year. I was kind of wandering through the dealer room, and sitting there at the GMT table, I saw this enormous box. And it said 18OE on the side, and then had the beautiful cover kind of illustration of this train, locomotive coming at you at all these beautiful colors. I thought, Railways on the Orient Express. And I thought, I love the Orient Express. I've read so many mystery novels and things about the Orient Express. I thought, oh, this would be cool. And I picked up the box, and I almost dropped it. Okay? Because I really wasn't expecting it to weigh a metric ton, but it did. And that immediately fired the geek in me. I mean, there's a certain part of me, Jimmy, I don't know about you, but like when I pick up a box and it's really heavy, I just kind of almost get like that Homer Simpson, like, oh, donuts. I kind of get that feeling like I want to know what's in there. And so I'm looking at it, and I'm seeing the illustration on the back of some of the components. I'm like, wow, this game looks fantastic. So fast forward, and I sent Mark Frazier, the publisher of DICE is the name of the company, Designs and Creative Entertainment, I believe it is. And I asked him, I said, hey, would you be willing to send a review copy to me? And he was nice enough. He wrote back and said, people don't usually ask for, a review copy of something like this. But, he said, sure, I'd be happy to. And so he sent it to me, and he said, take as much time as you need to try to wrap your mind around it, because, I was very upfront about the fact that I didn't have a ton of 18xx experience. I had played games like 1830, 1860, 1846, I believe it was, with Eric Brocious. He taught me that at the WBC, a fantastic teacher. And so I was like, sure, so after school let out this year, I had the chance, and my buddy Lloyd and I were like, all right, listen, we're going to spend like 4 days on this game. And so we set it up on the gaming table downstairs, and I tweeted some pictures of it and whatnot, and we tackled it, and it was a very, very interesting experience. So that's kind of my background a little bit. Jimmy, could you perhaps share a little bit about your kind of 18xx background or credentials or whatever it is you want to call them, what your experience is with these kinds of games, just so that people have an understanding of where you're coming from?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So my first experience, which I think is probably common to a lot of XXers, was 1830. It was maybe 5 or 6 years ago at a gaming retreat, and there were 4 of us. One had played it a bunch years before, but hadn't played in maybe 5 or 10 years, and the other 3 of us were complete newbies. And so that the guy who sort of knew what he was doing taught it, but it had been so long that when the 3 of us just played horribly, he wasn't able to push the game along. So about 6 hours into it, we were probably about a third of the way through it, and we just called it. We said, okay, had enough. Know some of the things we don't want to do next time, but we'll stop here. What's funny is that after that introduction, it still fascinated me. And so I went home, picked up Steam Over Holland, played that a few times, got bit by the bug, went to the Chattanooga Railway Gaming Challenge.
Ooh, I've heard great things about that.
Absolutely amazing. And it's funny because you go there and all of a sudden you hear all these negatives about XXers, but you go there and just about everybody is so nice and so helpful. And I've only had really positive experiences there. And yeah, got bit by that bug, started playing 46, Mexico, EU, the list goes on and on. And since I was able to pick up a couple games at Chattanooga and started playing XX weekly with a group I have in Dayton, which is usually just the three of us. And we've been playing 3 or 4 years now. I still go to Chattanooga each year. I've played it at Origins and Gen Con, at the Columbus Area Board Gaming Society. There's a Columbus group that I get to at least a few times a year, not nearly as often as I'd like. It's funny when I look at, because I'm a BGG geek and log all my plays, and within my top 10, I've got at least 3 or 4 XX games. So I've definitely been bitten by the bug.
So it's a genre that clearly resonates with you and something that is fascinating. And I would have to agree because, what has kept me coming back to some of these titles is they're the kind of games that you play that as soon as you're done, you're kind of doing like a instant replay in your mind, and you're thinking about, ooh, well, what if I had done this, or I responded this way when Tom laid this track here, but what if I had countered with this instead, or maybe I should have invested in these shares at this time instead of that, and so there's all of this post kind of game thought process that goes on. And, it's the kind of game that, kind of like Dominant Species, I kind of find myself, sometimes I even dream about it, where, I've had this great game and I'm sitting there thinking, and obviously my brain's working on it while I'm asleep. And so it's one of those kind of games. I think that's why people kind of have a tendency to think of 18xx games almost as lifestyle games like chess or Go or something like that, because there's so much variety in the games that are out there and so much to explore that it really is kind of almost limitless in the amount of kind of experiences you can have. And so, that's kind of what's drawn me to the genre. But, there is a little bit of an intimidation factor there. And for 18OE, that intimidation factor is just the sheer scope and size and weight of this game. So, I was really kind of curious to try it. And so we kind of set up the game. We've played a few times on the scenario of England and France. That was kind of the one that I picked. I picked that one because I only had to use one of the map boards. We can talk a little bit about that later. And also because, I kind of have some affinity for those two countries. I've been there, I recognize some of the places, etc. And so I thought, this will be fun. Little did I know that those were, that's one of the more complicated scenarios of the short scenarios to play because of there's a lot of opportunity to move almost by water and through water in 18OE, and that was something that took a little bit of time to kind of wrap my mind around. So Mark Frazier, who was kind enough to make himself available to me, say, hey, text me if you have any questions or what have you, and I'll try to help you out. And he's like, yeah, that's why I told you should do like the Russia, Austria, kind of map first, and not this one. But I was like, whoops, we're in it and we're having fun, so we're going to keep plowing away. And so I want to, thank him for his help. So what really kind of struck me about this game is that the game is kind of, it's this massive thing to start. There's all of these rail companies, so you have, sort of an initial auction for your privates and miners, and then you're going to have the ability to float some regional rails, and then those regionals can later turn into majors and can begin to absorb other kind of holdings that you have. So they could absorb some of the miners. And, when they absorb the miners, they kind of get any sort of special abilities, if you want to think of it that way, that the miner might possess. Or you can turn them into nationals. And so there's this really interesting progression about how the story unfolds in the game. And this is an 18xx game that I really felt kind of did deliver like a story, because you start with these tiny little railroads, and they're making their little pathetic runs between these two cities, and they're like all happy with themselves, and they're making you like, $40, and then you like take your share of that, and once you calculate, it's like, wow, I made $17, woohoo, and you're kind of feeling like, wow, this is taking a while to get going. But then before you know it, the game begins to ramp up. And once those 3 trains come out, and the majors start to float, and you start to have some consolidation, then all of a sudden the game really kind of picks up momentum for a lot of reasons that we'll discuss later. And, what I found was that the game actually, while it was a slow build, it kind of had a fast end for us when we played it. And it was really enjoyable and somewhat surprising. I'm used to 18xx games kind of dragging a little bit towards the end, or getting to a point, Jimmy, where it's almost like, let's just do the math. Like no one's going to add any more track. No one's going to do anything. We're just going to play out these last few operation rounds and see what happens. And 18OE did not seem to have that, in my plays and my limited experience. And so there were so many interesting things to think about. The progression of the companies, the different trains you can buy. You can buy a 3 train or a 3+3, or a 4 train or a 4+4. And that's going to allow you to not just go to cities, but also little towns to scoop up a little extra income. The whole notion of track rights in this game, where you can only build track in certain companies until the first major kind of absorbs another rail company, a miner that has track rights in a foreign country, and then kind of like anything goes at that point. It's like a release the Kraken kind of moment, and then everybody can start to snake around and build track. I found that really interesting. The Orient Express runs, I thought that was a neat little touch. The first time that you can make those connections, you get some nice bonuses and to your income and possibly your stock and whatnot. So there's a lot of things that were really compelling to me about this title. And even though it was really difficult, I got to tell you, like my first play, Jimmy, Lloyd and I, it took us probably 9 hours. It was brutal. But that was 9 hours, not of frustration, but of like just trying to figure out how everything works and consulting player aids and the rule book and double checking things, making sure we are playing them right, sending a text to Mark every now and then saying, are we doing this correctly? Something like that. But we weren't ever like frustrated with the game, and we were intrigued with it. And then, of course, the future plays went more smoothly and was more fun, and more of the strategy kind of opened up for us. So that's kind of, to me, my initial impressions of the game were one of a lot of really interesting decisions, a definite kind of a narrative arc, a lot of really cool track building and blocking and kind of hosing your opponent, and a really interesting kind of dynamic between, the kind of beginning of the minors and regionals and then the majors, and being able to kind of hopscotch across the board with this water movement and all this cool stuff. So those are kind of my impressions of 18OE. Now, what I was going to ask you, rather than me just kind of, doing a review and saying, this is what I like about it, this is what's cool about it, I wanted to talk with someone like you who has much more experience and ask if you can maybe describe for people out there who are familiar with this style of game, what are the things about 18OE that kind of make it different or unique in your mind?
Well, the first thing, that this isn't unique, but most XX games fall into one of two categories. They're games geared either for the engineers or the accountants. So either for those people, those people that love laying track and love running good railroads, or for those people that are more interested in financial manipulations. 18OE falls squarely in the first category. It is a game where you're trying to create big routes, get your tokens down, run for lots of cash, and increase your stock value. It is a two-dimensional stock market, but I don't find it to be particularly volatile, and then possibly a little bit of dumping to try and change operating order for the major companies. After that, the thing that I think is unique to OE, if there's another game that has it, I'm not familiar with it, is that all the companies start at the beginning of the game. So that there's this really huge initial auction. But right after that, all of the regional railroads go up for sale. And until every regional railroad has been started, nobody is allowed to buy a share of any regional railroad other than the president's share. So it's possible for that to take more than one stock round, but nobody is growing up, nobody is merging, none of that until every railroad has started. And
Right.
that I think is unique to OE, and it's an interesting difference. So you're never wondering later on, well, should I start a railroad or should I buy stock? Well, your only option is to buy stock later on.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It also leads to, a little bit of a feeling of being overwhelmed. I know I did. I mean, because if you're playing, say, like we were a two-player game, I think we were each running, like when you looked at, I'm not talking about the privates, I'm talking about the regionals and the minors. I think each of us was running like 5 companies or something. It was insane. There's the little tokens that keep track of operating kind of order on the back of the track, and it's this huge conga line of letters, and it's like, wow, this is kind of overwhelming because you're trying to kind of plan and think about, like, what is going to be best for this railroad to do right now, and I have to kind of try and keep 5 sort of plans in my head.
Yes.
And all the while you're trying to peer into the future and saying, okay, who do I want to join up later? Who do I want to combine with? Who has really good station position right now? Because if I've got, a miner that has 2 really crucial stations out on the map, I want to think about later trying to absorb them into one of my majors, because I'm going to be able to replace those station tokens with the major station tokens. And not only am I going to be able to do that, Jimmy, I'm going to be able to take the station tokens from the most expensive part of the board and just plop them down. It's like, wow, that's awesome. And so you're thinking short term, maximize your profit, pathetic though it might be, and then you're thinking long term, which is, who's going to team up here, who's going to join up and give me the best chance. And it's a lot to think about. It can be a little overwhelming. Now, that's for someone like me and Lloyd, who don't have a ton of 18xx experience. Did you find that to be overwhelming as well, or was that just fun for you?
Yeah, I'd say more fun than overwhelming, but yeah. I mean, but by the time you exit that initial stock round, you've more or less got your strategy for the game. And that the miners are cool for all their special powers, but the biggest thing about the miners is, where am I starting it? Because you can start in any city. And where am I placing its second token? Because, as you say, when you merge that with a regional, which becomes a major, you get those token spots. And that's huge. So, yeah, but by the time you exit, and if you're playing with the concessions, that's a huge thing in the initial stock round, because it's possible, even in a 2-player, for one player to get 4 stock actions before the other player gets his first, which can decide the game right there. So yeah, the beginning, it is a very front-loaded game. I know you said it's a slow build, and it is from laying track and running routes, but God, that initial stock round doesn't make it feel like a slow build at all.
Yeah. So, I think we agree that that's a really interesting thing, and I wasn't aware that, this is unique to 18OE. Are there other factors that you feel are unique in the game as well?
Yeah, the second thing that's really big in OE that I've never seen implemented the same way is this concept of nationalization. So what's common to most XX games is that you start out with small trains, and as the game progresses, you get bigger trains. As bigger trains come out, the smaller trains rust or become obsolete. So when the first 4 train comes out, the 2 trains go away. When the first 6 train comes out, the 3 trains go away. And when the first level 8 train goes out, the 4 trains go away. At each of those points, the president of the company, the major companies, has the option to nationalize. If they nationalize, they lose all of their revenue, but now for the remainder of the game, they can get obsolete trains from the pool for no cost. And so all of a sudden there's not this huge issue, which is common in most XX games, of, oh my God, my trains are about to rust. What am I going to do? Which makes it a whole lot more newbie friendly, and also creates a whole lot of interesting decisions. Late game, the major railroads will run for more than the nationals, but early to mid game, the nationals can run for significantly more, and so that affects what do I want my stock portfolio to look like when I purchase regionals at the very beginning of the game. Do I want to get multiple regionals in the same country so that I can nationalize one and leverage it? Those national railroads add a whole lot of questions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I totally agree with what you're saying. It took me a little while, though, to understand the value of national rails. Like, I kind of, because I know in other 18xx games, letting your trains rust, letting that happen to you, and it's kind of like it's a failure, and at that point you're often looking at taking a huge hit to your personal finances, because in some games the president then has to buy out of his own cash a train for that railroad, and in others the railroad just might end up going bankrupt, and you could be facing that insolvency. In this game, I kind of looked at nationalization as a failure. Like, I was just like, oh, nationalization is a safety net that, Ed put in there, to help cushion my fall when I, play poorly. And then after playing it, a couple of times, I was like, wait a minute. As you said, a national can actually do better for you than, one of your regionals. And I'm like, oh, and even it can do better than your majors early on. And I was like, okay, so this actually could be a totally valid strategy. Like, I don't want to nationalize everything, but as you said, you want to pick and choose, and you can find a railroad that's like prime for nationalization, and then you're not sitting there sweating and worrying about, am I going to have enough money to get the train that I need when this one rusts. And while we're talking about that, I just also want to send us a little shout out there. Love the fact that written right on the train card, it tells you when they rust. That's just fantastic. So anyway, that's just a little side note, but I really didn't understand the value of nationals until I'd played it a couple of times, and I agree with you. I mean, it's a fascinating kind of a thing, because you're looking at usually a huge short-term gain, but maybe a long-term loss, but it might not, work out as a loss at all, depending on how you play it. And, I don't have the expertise yet to really time that correctly. I think a lot of that has to do with timing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so early game, the nationals are good. Late game, they're not. So if you're going to nationalize in general, you'd like to nationalize when the four trains come out. At the same time, if you can delay nationalizing until you've managed to do your OE run, then your company has got the first time you do an OE run, which is going somewhere from the east side of the board to the west side of the board, or from the north to the south. It depends on the scenario. You either get whatever revenue you generated from that OE run into the company, or the company gets 3 stock jumps. And that can be pretty big later on. So if you can avoid nationalizing until after you do your OE run, that company will be, certainly from a stock position, will be as good as anything else, particularly since once you nationalize, you always pay, so you always move up. It'll be competitive from a stock value for the entire game. It won't be competitive from a revenue generation, because it'll be restricted to its one country. And it'll probably be running smaller trains. But if you manage your stock portfolio so you're not too heavily invested in your national, you can use that national to avoid being train locked in your other companies, because the national basically uses government money to buy trains. So it's always possible to purchase trains out of your other companies, so that your major companies can buy bigger trains and can push the game forward if your opponent doesn't want it to.
And that also is taking money out of the bank, right? So
That's
directly.
right.
So that's going to also possibly accelerate the ending of the game, yeah?
Yep, potentially, yeah.
So that's a whole nother interesting kind of a twist on what I've seen from other 18xx games is the way nationalization is kind of handled here. And I appreciate you taking the time to kind of explain those key differences, especially that little detail about wait until the company has done its OE run, which, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, duh, why didn't I understand that? Why didn't I see that? And that's an excellent point because, of course, you want your stock value to be as absolutely high as you can get it. And, since you're not really, often going to need, money when you nationalize because of how you acquire trains, that is. You might need it for terrain costs, for laying track and whatnot. But, you really, that stock bump is hugely important, yes?
Right. And once you nationalize, you do not pay for terrain. So
right.
As soon as a company is nationalized, it loses its cash, but it never needs it again. And so
exactly.
Anytime it would need it, it uses government money, i.e. the bank.
Right.
It does lose all of its tokens, which can be an issue. But again, before you nationalize, it's possible to sell tokens between companies, and yet another way to game the system.
Right, exactly. While we're talking about this whole idea of, nationalizing and looking at how you're going to spread out across the board, make your Orient Express run, one of the other things that I know, you had talked with me about pre-production before we started recording was your kind of thoughts about how tile laying, how track laying works in this game. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes this unique in 18OE?
Yeah, and it is unique. I've not seen it. Well, I don't know that it's unique, but I haven't seen it in any other games. I think it may be in C2C. But the way it works is that companies have track points that they can spend. So your minor companies, your regional companies have 3 track points, your majors have 6, and your nationals have 9. And so if you're laying yellow tracks, or the most basic track, that costs 1 track point. If you're laying metropolises, which are the biggest cities in the game and worth the most, that costs 2 track points. And then upgrading that stuff doubles. So upgrading yellow to green, green to brown, brown to gray costs 2 track points, and upgrading metropolises cost 4. So when a national has the opportunity to lay track, it is possible for it to lay 9 track at a single OR. If you've had any experience with 1830, you're laying a single track each time, or
right.
Pretty much any other game where you're laying at most 2. Being able to lay track literally across Russia in a single OR is just mind-boggling.
And it also opens up what I thought were some really interesting opportunities for just really mean play.
Sure.
I don't know how many times I just completely blocked Lloyd from Paris. It was almost like I threw my arm around it and I was like, like every time he tried to kind of sneak in, every time he tried to kind of build around to find another way into Paris, I just totally blocked him.
Yep.
And he had to wait to get into Paris until we could upgrade track. And because of the order of operations, I was able to kind of upgrade the track first, which then allowed me to lay track, which then prohibited him from getting into Paris again, until he ended up upgrading another piece. And so, every round that I'm able to delay my opponent from reaching one of these larger valued regions on the board, these cities, these metropolises, and what's the other term? Not big city.
Grand cities.
Grand cities. Yes, thank you. Every time I can stop someone from getting to those, every operation round I can delay them is almost like money in my bank and money away from them because, that's just improving my revenue, improving my flexibility for the future and prohibiting, his and inhibiting his. So I was really kind of surprised because, as you said, the games that I've played, a lot of these 18xx games are on these kind of small maps, and they're very tight. And, you really shouldn't, I don't think, be able to lay 1 or 2 tracks max. But because the scope of this game is so huge, as you said, you're able to make these big runs. Because I got to tell you, even 3 tracks with a, minor or a little regional is still can be devastating.
Oh, sure.
And so it's a really, really interesting and very cutthroat. Like, there's a lot about 18OE that I feel is kind of like flexible and open. There's a lot of options. Bankruptcy or insolvency doesn't seem to happen real often. There's always usually something you can do to wiggle out, right? But this is the part of the game that just is, punch each other in the face kind of fun of the game, if you find that kind of confrontation fun, and I certainly do. So are there any thoughts you have, about this kind of, is this where really the competition of the game lies, or is it still in that stock market?
No, you're absolutely right. This is, in general, the stock market, I would call kinder, gentler. That the track laying is the exact opposite. That's the nastiness, and if you play it with Mark or Edge, you really get to see that nastiness, both with the track laying and with placing of tokens. So that there's this push-pull when you start the game that you'd like to keep your companies small as regionals because you can own 100% of the regionals and you get all the cash, but the regionals only have 2 tokens. As soon as you grow up to a major, now you've got another 6. And I'll tell you what, if I grow up first and I get to place all my tokens while you're still a regional, you're going to have a bad day. There's this huge push-pull. You were talking earlier about, the pay me now, pay me later sort of questions as far as growing up. And I guess so there are 2 more things that are different with OE. One concerns the city. So, as we were saying, there are towns, there are regular cities or grand cities, and then there are metropolises. The regular cities start the game with a single hole, so space for 1 token, and that never increases. So from the beginning of the game, you've got these choke points. The grand cities go from 1 to 2, but then they stop at 2, and then the metropolises go up to either 3 or 4 as you get into the some places into the green, but certainly into the brown and the gray tiles. What makes those choke points, so with 9 track points or 6 track points, it's often possible to go around those cities. That's possibly lost revenue, but that may or may not be a huge deal. It is usually additional terrain costs, which is irritating. But
yes.
The biggest deal with it, though, is the thing we had talked a little bit about earlier, which is the water movement. So,
yes,
OE is different in that there is this, and it's very abstracted, but this concept of traveling across water. In order to do that, you've got to enter and exit via ports. Most of the ports are cities. In fact, most of the ports are regular cities. There are a couple of grand cities and at least 1 metropolis, 2 metropolises. But if you can block those out from the other player, then you make it very difficult for them to move via water movement. And so blocking those early, getting your tokens in those spots, starting your miners in those spots is huge.
Yeah, the token position is really cutthroat, as you said, and I couldn't agree with you more. And one of the interesting balancing things about this that I really enjoyed is when you kind of turn that regional into the major, and you get all of those station tokens, right? Mm-hmm. You then are basically floating that company, and you're going to basically move your par value marker, and then you're going to kind of bump it up to the appropriate spot, the entry spot on the stock market. And what I found really interesting, because as you said, if you let some majors get a lot of tokens out quickly, you can have a really bad day. But what I liked was the fact that in the turn order, the majors are going after the regionals, any regionals or minors that are left. So it's almost like it gives the players, if you didn't see that coming, it gives you a little bit of time to try to react to it and adjust to it before, the major starts kind of plopping down tokens in locations that are going to make life difficult for you. Because, those ports and those other choke points can really sort of hem a railroad in. I had one of Lloyd's hemmed in the southwest corner of France, and he's kind of pinned up against Madrid, and so he could kind of go to that distant city, but there really wasn't anywhere else he could go, But the game then offers you opportunities. Of course, when you merge, then you can kind of hopscotch. You can kind of, replace a small kind of hemmed-in company's tokens with the token of the company that absorbed them, and then you now have new opportunities to lay track. And so, I find that you can hem people in. It's like you can hold them down, but eventually they're going to wiggle free. And I like that kind of aspect. I think in the wiggling and the time it takes, they're probably, they might not win the game, but they're still going to be in the game. And I like that because, there's a phrase that someone used, I forget who it was, I thought it was brilliant. There's this idea of, we like modern games because there's no player elimination. There actually can be elimination in some 18X titles if you go completely bankrupt, but there is certainly that idea. The person said, hey, there may be no player elimination, but there is player irrelevance. And I think it might have been Kurt Runco, who's a guy, Enzo622 on Board Game Geek. And I think he might have been the one that said that. And I remember that really resonated with me because, no one likes to feel irrelevant. And in some 18xx games, you can kind of get, under the wheel and you're like, all right, I'm going to be able to survive. I'm going to be able to continue to play, but I have no shot here. And so, that can kind of become a frustrating or painful experience. But 18OE seems to offer, maybe just because of the sheer scope of the game, maybe because of some of these things we're talking about, but it seems like there's possibilities to come back and be competitive. Like, you might not win, but you're going to be competitive. And that's something that I really enjoyed about it. Now, that could be because we're not very good at the game. So I want to know if you found that to be true as well, or whether we're just not quite cutthroat enough or knowledgeable enough to completely hose somebody. What do you think?
No, I think the more experience you get, the more ways you figure to wriggle out of things. Especially if you're able to see what's coming and plan ahead for it. So, for instance, if you see yourself getting hemmed in general, you only nationalize when the 4, 6, and the 8 trains break. You are able to nationalize at other trains, at other times if you don't have a train and you don't have money in your company to purchase a train. It's a little less desirable, but if you can maneuver that, because all of a sudden you're going to be irrelevant for a couple of ORs, that can be a big thing, and it can take people by surprise. That's just one off the top of my head. The other thing I've found playing 2-player, in general, it is really good to have control of the same number of companies. So by the time you get to the major phase, in theory, in a 2-player game, both of you should have 3 companies. I've played with my partner where I think I had 4 to her 2. We may have been playing a smaller scenario where I had 3 to her 1. And she won because she owned 100% of her one company, and she was able to put the stock value of it while I was busy trying to get trains for all of mine. So what I find is that there's no no-brainer decision in OE. You talked about the 2 different types of trains earlier. In general, you always want a plus train rather than a regular train. But if the choice is to get a plus train next OR or get a regular train this OR, I'm not so sure which one is better. And can I create a run where I'm hitting high cities, possibly by doing water and going from, I can't remember off the top of my head, but New York to London to whatever the Grand City is, and then northeast part of the UK.
It might be Birmingham or something like that.
It might, yeah. Birmingham
Yeah.
certainly would be another
Yeah.
one. Yep, it'd be nice to have a 3+3, but I can use a 3 and I can use it now. That may not be so bad. Purchasing port authorities and Pullman cars is yet another decision point, and that's just something I found with this game is that Ed has created so many different decisions. Keep it real interesting.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, you mentioned those Port Authority tokens, and the whole notion of kind of water movement was a little kind of foreign to me when I started playing the game. I'm like, wait a minute, you're telling me I'm running a train from New York to Dublin to, Birmingham to London. It's like, really? That doesn't really make sense. But, when I looked at one of the minor companies, it's a steamship company. It's a steamship and transportation company. It's like, and that really kind of helped me, the historic nature of some of these companies. I'm like, oh, yeah, transportation back in those days, not only cargo, of course, moving by boat and then by rail, but then, you also had people who were coming across on cruise liners. You crossed the pond on, a beautiful cruise ship, and then you went into a port in Ireland, and then you hopped a train, and, you crossed the channel on a ferry, and then you hopped another train, and you went all the way to, Constantinople. There's this kind of this combination transportation thing, which I really enjoyed once I understood it. And I think that while the water movement can seem very complex to a new player like me, what I found really interesting was, once I kind of grokked the system and understood, that these different sea zones have printed right there on the map for you, -1, -1, -1. You're like, oh, what does that mean? And then you come to understand that, each of those -1s that you're not able to mitigate either through a port that you own or have access to, or through a port authority token, you're going to kind of suffer a penalty. So if you have to cross 2 -1 sea spaces in order to make a run and you have a 4 train, well, guess what? You're only really doing New York to London because you lost the other 2 length of your run, or your capacity, however you want to think of it, in that sea crossing, right? But if you get a Port Authority token, that gives you a -2. And you can apply, a -1 to this region. You can have a port there. Maybe you got a private port, and that eliminates that sea region. Before you know it, you're actually making these really nice, long, complicated routes full of all these juicy cities and generating a lot of income. And so I really kind of enjoyed that because it opened up a whole nother facet to the game. I've seen ferries and stuff before, but not this kind of sea movement. I found that really, really interesting. Is that also something kind of unique to 18OE, or have you seen that in other games like this?
That I've never seen before, and it is very abstracted, and I think for the most part it's more sizzle than substance, but it does create some interesting decisions. So, going from New York to London, New York in gray is a $160 city, which is more than any other city on the map. And so,
right.
In general, people want to come down to Constantinople to get their OE runs. However, if you're able to hit, New York is a $160 city, London is a $120 city, and Berlin is another $120 city. Okay, you've lost your OE run, but you're hitting 3 of the biggest cities on the board. Maybe you don't care so much, and so there, and I think Ed did a great job with abstracting it and making it as simple as possible, so that it's not too kludgy, and it does add even more decision points, and certainly from a tokening and track placement perspective, more ways to block people out.
Right. Yeah, and there is that kind of push and pull. And this is not the first time that you've used the phrase, decision points. And, I've used the term decision tree. And there are a ton of decisions in this game. I mean, I often, will upgrade track for no other reason than to gain extra income. There is all this interesting income inflation in the game. At the beginning, you're struggling to make, $18. And, later on, you're making these runs that are like $150, $180 in a run. And then, geez, if you get some of those D trains, that double the value of a route, you're like, holy moly, So you get this really nice, rewarding experience of progression, and you almost have like a pride in it. It's like, I took this from this tiny little railroad running between these two cities, and look at what it's become, and then you kind of harumph and light a cigar or something. I don't know. It's a really interesting kind of a phenomenon, and you only get it with games, I think, that are of this scope, somewhat of this length, and also where you have so many options and decisions. You can bog down in it. I know you and I talked before about, somebody who will go through these painstaking calculations to find one extra dollar. And I remember talking with Joe and Eric, and they're like, boy, you really don't want to play that way if you can help it, because, in the amount of time that you spend trying to seek the extra dollar, the game might have been over and you could have set up and played again, when you add all that time together that people might take. But of course, that's an individual player style preference sort of a thing. But I really enjoyed the ability to change that track, upgrade the city, lay a new route to make an even better connection, to increase my options, plop a token down, and suddenly, the face of northern France has changed, in one operating round. And it's just a stunning kind of a turn of events. And I really enjoy the decision space in this game. Do you enjoy that as well? Do you think this has it more or the same? Or how would you rate the sort of overall decision space in this game as opposed to others?
I guess it's a tough one to answer. So that there are
that's why I asked you, Jimmy.
There are a ton of XX games out there, and I'm always trying to pare down and reduce my collection with mixed results. But I have managed to cut down a lot of my XX games, and so each of my XX games does different things and has different types of decision points. 1830 is all about the stock market, and so there are a lot of interesting decisions as far as, am I going to pay out, move up, move back, where am I parring stuff, who's going to get the priority next, what do I need to worry about. 1817 is, in my opinion, got more decision points than any other XX game.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I've played 17, I think 25 times now, and I still have no clue what I'm doing.
Wow, I've never had the chance to play that one. So if I see a Gen Con or something, we'll have to try it out maybe.
That'd be cool. It is mind-boggling. That one is all about financial manipulation, merging companies, growing companies, acquiring companies, shorting companies.
Right.
OE is about laying track. OE is about buying trains and using them effectively. It does have some other decision points. We talked earlier about the OE runs, and do you take the cash or do you take the stock bump? There's certainly a pacing point as far as, do I want the game to run out, or do I want it to go an extra couple of ORs so I can catch leaders and cause leaders to bump their heads? So from an engineering perspective, I would say OE has as many decision points as any other engineering game. From an accounting perspective, it has much fewer.
Right. And you said that most games, tend to kind of favor one or the other, yes?
Right, yes, absolutely.
Right. The other thing that I wanted to talk about as it relates to this game is the fact that I spent a lot of time looking for an 18xx game that would play well with two players. And one of the reasons I bought 1860 Railways on the Isle of Wight is that people said, "Oh, that's a really good one for 2 players." And I got to tell you, OE, I thought it played very well with 2. I didn't have any problems playing the short scenario with 2 at all. I found it very enjoyable. How would you rate this game as a 2-player experience?
It is my favorite 2-player game. I've played 60 probably about 4 or 5 times as a 2-player, and actually one of the reasons that I stopped playing 60 is as a 2-player it didn't have enough interesting decisions. 62 is another one that's well regarded as a 2-player, and that I got rid of my copy of it. That probably is a very good 2-player game as well. In general, if I'm playing a 2-player game and you lose the shared incentive that the both of us have shares in a company, and so we want that company to do well, and this other guy doesn't, right. And so you lose that. And so, in my opinion, 2-player XX games succeed if they're mostly engineering games and not financial games. And so, for that reason, I think OE does really, really well.
Well, that's good to hear because, I wasn't sure if that was just me and maybe I just didn't have enough experience with it yet to find some sort of hole or something. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think that the decision space and everything and all of the railroads you're trying to kind of manage and then steer towards consolidation really just kind of makes the game incredibly interesting. And, of course, buying into each other's stock, eventually, especially, as the majors and, you see a company doing really, really well, then, you can start kind of investing in that. And as you said, kind of getting that mutual sort of benefit going on there, and leeching off of a really successful railroad. So that's something else that I really enjoy.
Oh, there's certainly, even in a 2-player, that there's certainly good reasons to purchase somebody else's stock. Particularly if you're planning on nationalizing one of your railroads, you don't want a lot of stock in that railroad. And so you buy the other guy's stock, especially if it looks like he's committed to keeping it, and you'll get that stock appreciation. And depending on how it plays out, you may benefit almost as much as he or she does each time they pay out and they move up on the stock chart. The other thing I wanted to say about why I think OE is great as a 2-player and a 3-player is because of the short scenarios. The short scenarios go 4 to 6 hours, whereas the medium game goes 8 to 10 and the full game goes 12 to 14, depending on player experience. Short scenarios are playable in a night. Like I said, we get together each week, and it's pushing it. But if we start at 6, we can be done by 11 or 12. And I feel like you get all of the same feel of the game as a short scenario that you do for the full game. I know some people think that the full game is more epic in scope than the short scenarios. I personally don't feel that way, but opinions vary. What's neat though with the short scenarios is that the game comes with I think 8 pre-written short scenarios, and then it's easy to create more. I think I've created 3 of my own. Wow! Yeah, there's even more to be created now because basically each short scenario is 2 countries. There are, I think, 8 countries on the map, and so you can do the math. There are a whole lot of short scenarios you can create, which means you don't have to, as you get bored with, UK and France, now I don't have to go out and buy a new $100 XX game. Now, instead of UK, France, I'm doing Spain, Italy, or Italy, Prussia, or Scandinavia, UK. And so it's obviously it's not infinite replayable, but it sure feels like it sometimes.
Yeah, it's pretty darn close, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because that was something else that struck me about the game. Because when I first looked at it at the WBC way back when I was impressed by its weight and its beauty, and had my Homer Simpson moment, I looked at the price tag. It was like $200, and I'm like, that's a lot of money. I don't really have that much money right now. And I kind of like regretfully, slowly put it back, kind of patted it after I put it back. And as I walked away, I looked back and I was like, oh, $200. All right, listen. There's a lot of 18xx games that I've gotten, and usually the price tag is right around $100. It's not unusual to pay $100 for an 18xx game, which is kind of outrageous, but that's kind of the going market. That's kind of, it is what it is. They're small print runs, sometimes they're handmade, and they're expensive. And so I've paid $100 for an 18xx game, $89, at Game Surplus to pick up 1860 or, what have you. And, when I look at the $200 price tag now, I kind of almost think of it as a bargain. And one of the reasons for that is because of what you just said, which is there's so many short scenarios, medium scenarios, the full ridiculous game. If you want to do that and just have like a story to tell the grandkids someday, I mean, you've got all of that in one box, because if 18OE was just the full game, then I'm looking at a game that is sitting on my shelf that is like every other convention game that I own. It's like Advanced Civilization. It's like Twilight Imperium 3. It's the game that I love, but I never can get to the table. And with the short scenarios, after you get the first kind of play or two under your belt, like you said, the playtime is very reasonable. And I actually started bagging. Like once I was done with the scenario, I kind of got one of the big 20-gallon kind of plastic storage bags and kind of put everything for that specific scenario in that bag, all sorted in sub-baggies. And, we have the baggie disease in the gaming hobby, right? I never met a plastic baggie I didn't like. And so, when I go to play again, I just pull out that one bag. And everything's in there. Everything that I need is in there, and of course I have separate, containers for my track and whatnot. But, all of my companies, my tokens, my, my track rights, my, the bonus cities, all of that kind of stuff it's all kind of in there for me. And so I can just quickly set it up and start to play. And so it actually, I end up feeling like it offers, strangely enough, a great value for $200 because there's a lot of game in that box. And, while we're on the subject of value, I also want to just kind of throw out there as a general kind of a review sort of a notion. This game, the production value of this game, minus the money, which is ridiculous, but the production value of this game is ridiculous. The maps are mounted and gorgeous. They're like GMT kind of thickness. The finish on the maps, it's beautiful. The readability of the maps is fantastic, even for someone with bad eyes like me. The tokens, the railroad company charters, the cards, they could have just been on paper. They're on this beautiful kind of thick stock. They're double-sided for, the regional / major and then the national. There's spots on the company boards for where you put your tokens and what those station tokens are going to cost you. And, if there's a special ability of the company, like a miner, it's written right there on the board for you. Like, everything is fantastic. The player aids you had mentioned when I talked with you before about this, my friend Lloyd, who I played this with, Lloyd Keller, he said a lot of times these are just charts and things that are in the rule book and you're having to go there. Well, these are separate player aid cards on nice thick stock. They're fantastic. I can't really say enough about the production quality of this game. The box. I mean, the box of some of these 18xx games that I've gotten are like terrible, thin cardboard. They warp, they bow, they dish. Yep. This thing is like built like a tank. I think I could use it like, to jack the car up or, put the camper up for the winter if I really wanted to, right? I gotta wonder, at $200, I don't know that these guys really made much money on this game. This game to me seems almost like it was a labor of love. Like they needed to do this. They wanted to just get this out there into the hands of people like you and into the hands of people like me who are kind of exploring and discovering this, because this game as an ambassador for 18xx games from a production standpoint sets the bar really high and kind of shows that these games can be beautiful as well as strictly functional. There's actual art in this game, and so there's a lot of things about this that I really appreciate. What are your impressions of the overall production quality on this? Am I gushing too much about it, or do you think that's deserved?
Yeah, not at all. I think, well, and one thing you'd alluded to earlier is that it is a great ambassador of the XX genre, and the production is one of the reasons that it is. I don't think it's the best game to introduce somebody to XX, but I think it's pretty close because of a lot of the things we talked about earlier. The huge front loading to where by the time you get through the first set of ORs, you're either out of it and we can reset, or you're going to have, you're going to have a good game. The nationalization, which decreases the issues with trains rusting and getting caught up in the train rush, and then certainly the production value. I mean, this is a game that when it's set up, people are going to come and look. They may still be intimidated by it, but oh my God, that's gorgeous.
Right.
Honestly, I can't think of another Euro game that I would say has a regular Euro game that has better production value than 18OE.
Yeah, I mean, it really is exceptional, and it's one of the things that I think is a tremendous, kind of pro for the game. That labor of love. The other things are hidden things that I think are truly exceptional. The rule book. I found the rule book to be excellent. I mean, that thing is well indexed. It is very well explained. It gives examples. It gives some nice kind of illustrations to kind of go with your examples from time to time on really tricky stuff. It has these wonderful little designer notes that kind of tell you why things are the way they are and why they're working the way they are. And I really found the rulebook, you have to understand, this is the first 18xx game that I played without someone holding my hand. Every other 18xx game that I had tried, someone else introduced me to it, taught it to me, walked me through it, guided me through it. And this was the first one that, kind of Lloyd and I said, we're just going to start reading the rule book. We're going to read about the setup. We're going to look at the scenarios. We're going to go. And yeah, it took us a long time, but it didn't take us a long time because the rules are ambiguous. It didn't take us a long time because we couldn't find what we were looking for. It just took us a long time to kind of grok the whole thing and how all the systems work together. So I really thought that the rulebook was exceptional. What would you have to say about it?
Yeah, I'd agree. And I know whenever at a convention Mark teaches the game, prior to that, he strongly recommends people read the rule books. And I know for myself, I did that prior to the playtesting. And it does. It makes a huge difference. I think the rule book is excellent. There are some ambiguities. There's some edge cases, but in any game of this size, that there are going to be some. And Mark has just been huge on the forums for when those ambiguities show up to clarify them. The other thing, I know you mentioned it, but I can't overemphasize how wonderful those player aids are. That there are a whole bunch of them, but the stuff that people need to know. So, what are the phase changes? Because you've basically got 3 different types or 4 different types of companies. You've got minors, regionals, majors, and nationals. So what are the different train limits? What are the different track points? When do the OE run bonuses change? If I'm laying across water, how much does track cost? How much do tokens cost? And there's not just one player aid for that. There are 4 of them. So on a game this size, especially if you're playing the full game, people aren't sitting next to each other and having to pass one player aid among 6 people gets irritating.
Right.
But there are 4 of them, and they were all beautifully done. So yeah, I can't say enough. I mean, I think Mark really has created, from a publication standpoint, created an amazing game.
Yeah, I find that I have to agree with you on that, and I always try to kind of look at things fairly, the cons of the game. I do have a few of things that I'm not super fond of about the production. Some of which I think could have been done better, and some of which I think just can't be helped. I'm talking example, the paper money. I mean that's just terrible stuff, but I think it's almost an inside joke in 18xx games at this point. People either use a computer or they use poker chips, or that they don't use the paper money. The paper money is clearly not my friend. Another con is a very small kind of a little nitpick, which is the stickers. My God, the stickers! Like when you're sticker in this game, it takes a while to sticker this bad boy.
Oh, yeah.
But it's worth it. I mean, it looks beautiful when it's done, and you can read them. The railroad station tokens have the letters that represent the companies, the colors. It's very clear. A lot of times the tokens are stained to match the color of the sticker or of the train company, so it's really, really nice. Don't get me wrong, but I found that some of the stickers for the station tokens were a little too big, and they were kind of overhanging the edges of the cylinders a little bit, and so I've had a couple kind of pop off or start to peel off, and it's not a huge deal. He does offer some extra stickers, which I think is awesome, but that was like one little nitpick. Like I wish that they fit a little bit better so that wasn't a worry. And then, of course, the biggest problem with the game is its sheer size. I mean, I have I have a regular dining room table as my gaming table. It was my mother's table growing up, and this thing was amazing. It's a 5-foot long table made of walnut, and the standard like 3 foot or so width, and when I played this scenario, I chose this scenario because it only needed one map. And so I thought, maybe I've got a shot at fitting it on this table. So I put the board out. I put the stock market board out, which is beautiful as well. And then I start laying out the track tiles, and I'm laying out the companies, and I'm laying everything out. And it's like every square centimeter, not inch, every square centimeter of that table was used. Some of the map surface was used. Like if it was a region like Spain, forget about Spain. Spain's dead to me. We're going to put stuff on Spain. We're going to pile it on there. And we barely fit it on the table. And I remember thinking to myself, man, if I was playing this with both maps, I would either have to be utilizing that map space as just places to put stuff, or I'd have to open up like the full leaf of my table, which is the full length of the table, like the whole top lifts off. Mm-hmm. So I'd have a 10-foot long table. Then I think it would fit on it. But its size is a little bit of a problem. And it's a little bit of a problem. I'm going to give you an analogous kind of situation between Railways of the World, which was my first real railroad game, and Steam. Or Age of Steam. Like once I started kind of playing Steam and Age of Steam, not only did I find they were a little more challenging than Railways of the World, but they were so much more compact. Like I could actually fit everything comfortably on the table. And I remember loving how Railways of the World looked. I mean, it was this beautiful board and these plastic bits to put on the empty cities and all this cool stuff. And I'm like, this looks awesome. But it was so big, I found it wasn't coming out. Because it was such a large game, I couldn't always get it to the table literally and fit it, and it was a pain to set up. And it's so eventually I kind of migrated because of the challenge reasons, but also honestly ergonomic reasons towards Steam and Age of Steam. So that's one thing that I think you got to be aware of with this game, is that even when you're playing a short scenario, it's going to take up a huge amount of real estate, and you kind of have to be prepared for that. And so I don't think there's a solution. It's not like they did anything wrong. As a matter of fact, they shrunk as I'm sure they shrunk the tile track size down from the standard size so that it's possible to even fit it on any kind of a table. I think if they were the normal track size, it'd be even more ridiculous. But, so it's not like there's anything they did wrong, but it is definitely something that you got to think about when you're trying to set this thing up, because it's huge. And so, that's when I started thinking of ways like I'm going to bag individual scenarios as I'm playing them to cut down on the setup time, to cut down on the table space. I'm going to use, unused portions of the map, things like that. Do you find that the size of this thing has ever have you ever not pulled it out because you're like, well, that's just so much to set up? Have you found that to be a con at all, or does that not worry you?
No. So as far as size, sure. You need to make sure you've got the table space, and yeah, my
Yeah.
dining room table has both leaves out, so it's, I don't know, maybe 8 feet wide, something like that, and so I can fit the game. There's not
Right.
any extra space, and like you, the track ends up on the board, and sometimes the bank does as well. But as far as setup, so right when I got the game, and Mark did a great job of pointing people to Plano boxes. So I have almost no plastic bags. I think I have 1 or 2 in there. But I've got all the track in 4 Plano boxes.
Wow.
And I've got all the tokens in 2 GMT, one of those GMT, I don't even know what you call them, but they used to hold the hex stuff for the war games.
The counter
the
trays.
hex trays. Yeah, the counter trays.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I've got 2 counter trays for the tokens. I've got 4 Plano boxes for the track. And so when I put the game away, the Plano boxes for the track goes on top.
Right.
The
right.
box is filled without the track in it. But I don't find setup to be that long. And certainly, I wouldn't think any longer. Maybe a little bit longer than an average XX, but not more than 10 or 15 minutes. It goes real quick. You've got the minors split out, and you've got the shares.
Privates and all that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got the shares set up by country. So once you hit the right country, you've got all those companies right there. And yeah, I wouldn't say it takes much more. I wouldn't say it takes much more than 15 minutes to set up a short scenario. And if you're going to be playing it for 4 to 6 hours, that's not a whole lot of time.
Yeah, it is always a matter of perspective, right? So I appreciate you giving a kind of a counter view to that, because that was one of the things that to me was difficult. Although, like I said, it got easier as I went along, as I kind of kept things sort of organized. So maybe, as you said, organization is really key, as it is with a lot of games. I mean, I think about even a Euro game like Caverna. I mean, that thing is ridiculous. If you don't have a way to kind of organize that, that's something that can be quite daunting as well. I think there's a guy actually from the Dice Tower, Robert Searling, who I think has a company, Insert Here. And, he custom designs these beautiful inserts for games like Caverna. I'll bet you he could craft something for 18OE that would be fantastic too, yes?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I used to not play Puerto Rico for exactly that reason. That's a much shorter game, and having to sit there and count out all the colonists and the victory, I was like, this just takes too long for what it is. And so I got on the geek. I was like, oh, you just bag them differently for the different player counts, and then all of a sudden it goes a whole lot faster. Oh, okay.
Right, right. Yeah, being organized does help, that's for sure, right, Jimmy? So I appreciate you sharing those tips with the Plano boxes and the counter trays and whatnot, because, that would certainly go a long way towards making things a little bit easier to set up. So, thanks for that. Are there any other cons that you have for this game? We've had a lot of pros, but what are your cons?
There are 2 cons from a production standpoint. One was completely outside of Mark's control, and that is the game is on 2 separate boards. And so when he sent it to the printer, I forget, I think the specifications, it had to be within either an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an inch. And so it satisfied that, but there's just this little bit of space in between the 2 boards. So when you put them up together, if you lay track on it, it doesn't quite fit. And so you need about an eighth of an inch space between the two of them. Now that there are little clips, and Mark's been so good about on the BGG forums of here, I use these clips to give it that space. And so I've done that, and that's fine. But that's certainly an irritation, particularly in a game that's costing $200. The second, it's kind of you damned if you do, damned if you don't. So, yep, that they absolutely needed to reduce the size so that it can fit on a dining room, a big dining room table.
Right.
The problem with reducing the size is now the track is smaller. And so, and not only is the track smaller, but the track completely butts up against each other. I think the track is not bigger than the hexes on the board, but it's right up there. Usually there's a little bit of space in between, not an OE. I believe there are identical sizes. So anytime you upgrade track, and in OE, because of all those track points, you're doing it quite a bit, you cause earthquakes on all of the track right around it.
Oh, the humanity, yeah.
So what Mark has done, he's pointed us to a little vacuum sucky thing, so you can actually suck up the track so that you don't create the. It's great.
And then you hold it, and then you can put the new one on there, and then lower it into place, and then turn off the suction. Is that how that works? That's fantastic.
It is cool. It's like a $2 thing off of eBay, but Amanda uses that. My partner Amanda uses that all the time, and
that's great.
Of course, when I play with the guys, we're all too cool for that, so we spend half the game fixing
you get the meat hooks in there.
That's
right. Yeah. Nobody wants to use the delicate vacuum. Yeah, that's great.
Right.
That's great. Yeah, I don't know that they could have done anything about that either.
No.
But I definitely have experienced what you're talking about. And so it is a little bit of an issue. Yeah, I mean, I've kind of always felt that the track, maybe because my fingers aren't as nimble as others, but I was always bumping things, and so it is an annoyance. Yeah. Also, as far as that gap, if it's an eighth of an inch gap, I don't know if anybody has talked about it before, but if you've ever laid tile, you can buy at Home Depot. There's little tile spacers that are designed to give you a space for your grout line, okay? Because you might have a 1/4 inch grout line or an 1/8 inch grout line or whatever. You can buy these little plastic spacers. They look like little crosses, and you would slide that down in there to maintain the consistent gap at the two ends of the board, and then put your clip on, and that thing would never move, and it would maintain a nice, consistent space there. So there's my contribution, my first contribution to the 18XX world, the Home Depot tile spacer. So that might work for people. So I want to throw that out there.
Yeah. The other thing that just occurred to me, the other con, so I don't think people wanted any more paper. That it's already taken up too much table space, but one thing that some people have found irritating with this is that, especially when you've got a full game, you've got 30 companies out there, and even in the small game, you've got 10 companies starting out. Is there's no place to track revenue. So a lot of other XX games, they've got a space where you've got an extra token for each company, and you put how much did it run for the last time, and so the next time you run, it shouldn't be running for less than the last time, or nothing has changed. It's, exactly the same. Or if you're paying attention when other people lay track, you can bump up what you're running for, and so it speeds up the game quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
OE does not have that.
No.
Now, the last thing that I got from Mark was he has a hat, which is why I don't think it even crossed his mind. He uses D10s. So after playing with him, I now have 2 sets of D10s in my poker chip box, and so whenever I play, I can use 2 D10s to say what the revenue for each of the companies are.
Nice.
But that's probably the last thing that's a little surprising for a game of this size, that it didn't have that revenue tracker.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true, and I hadn't really thought of that because there's so much math involved in the game as you're trying to calculate your routes and your values, and as you upgrade trains, now you're kind of recalculating and trying to think, okay, what's going to be the more beneficial route now that I have the capability to do this, or what have you. So, yeah, no, I totally agree with that as well. Well, Jimmy, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me about this game. This is a game that I was really intrigued by, really excited to get, excited to try out and play, and grateful for the opportunity to review it. And I'm really glad that it was something that I enjoyed, because I really understood that this was kind of, Ed and Mark's baby. And I have to be honest about my reviews, and sometimes I might sugarcoat things a little bit. Like I'll say, oh, well, this wasn't for me, or I didn't quite appreciate that, and I try not to. People who know me and who listen know that if they hear me talking like that, it probably means that it's not really resonating with me, and I'm just trying not to poop all over someone's dream. And so I kind of was really a little worried, because this was such a massive game, and he was willing to send it to me, that I was going to be like, oh, this is confusing, this is too much, I hate this, or I didn't get that, or but I was really glad that the game played well, that I understood it with a little bit of help from Mark and from the rule book, just from the rule book, and talking through it with Lloyd. I really think this is a game that's going to stick in my collection for a long time, to be honest with you, because as we said earlier, it's got tons of replayability, lots of opportunities for scenarios, and that epic game that someday I hope to play, be able to sit down and play the whole thing and just see what that would be like. And, feeling that kind of emotional drain when you're done. I imagine that would be just a really kind of a wonderful experience to have. And I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to check it out. So I want to thank you for being a great sounding board and a great expert, who's able to correct some things that I didn't understand and offer up all of the insight that you've offered, that really has got me thinking. You totally changed the way I was thinking about nationalizing railroads, for example, and, water movement, all of these things. So the token blocking and how you kind of merge companies and fold them into each other to your best advantage. So I want to thank you for taking the time to share your experience and share your knowledge with us, and for being on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Not a problem at all. And hopefully I'll have a chance to talk with you again, maybe about another game in the future.
That would be very cool.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode of The Long View. I, of course, want to thank my special guest, Jimmy Okalika, for being willing to come on the show and talk to me about the fascinating game 18OE. Of course, want to send a special shout out to my sponsor, GameSurplus.com. Go and check out Game Surplus the next time you're thinking of placing an online board game order, and discover why they are my first choice and why they should be yours. Their customer service is fantastic, legendary. Anything you're looking for, they'll track it down for you. If you're trying to find an import, they'll find it for you. If you're trying to scare up a copy of a game that is really hot right now and seems to be out of stock everywhere, send Velma an email over at games@gamesurplus.com, and she'll either grab one for you, or as soon as she gets the next shipment in, she'll set one aside for you and send you a friendly email letting you know that it's in. So go and check out why GameSurplus.com is a fantastic resource for board gamers. I also, of course, want to thank my local game store, The Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Give them a little shout out and a little love today. They are a growing resource for our region for anyone who likes board games, card games, collectible card games, video games, you name it, they've got it. That's The Gamer's Edge, conveniently located off of Interstate 80 in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, right on Main Street. So thanks to everybody out there for listening, and have a wonderful night.